Dear beautiful people, today I made a simple choice, and that choice was to, again, lift a little bit of the self imposed restrictions. Um, where you see for many spiritual teachers or mystics, there's a balance to be struck, and the balance to be struck is between what information that we share to the general public, what information is beneficial and what information becomes detrimental. Now, one could argue, yeah, someone who decides what information for me is beneficial and what information for me is detrimental is not respecting my sovereignty. And this is how many of you currently, for very good reasons, look at governments, look at elites, look at certain corporations and lobbyists, look at what we could call the deep state. When there is an elite that decides what you're supposed to know and what you're not supposed to know, well, that elite obviously doesn't want you to handle a certain aspect of reality or thinks you cannot handle a certain aspect of reality. Which of the two motivations is more likely? I leave it to your intuition. I find it pretty obvious. Well, then the question is, why do mystics often, who in a sense are initiated by the light forces in spirit, why do they hold back information? That's a difficult question. It's a difficult question because many circumstances determine this. In my own experience, in my own growth into the spiritual experience, I can tell you that exposure to spiritual experience is challenging. And that means, of course, if you want to grow, you need a certain exposure. That means you need a certain stimulation, but overstimulation can lead to regression. It can damage the nervous system. It can damage the neurology, basically. By overstimulation, overstressing the system. It's a little bit like overtraining when you go to the gym and you put too much weight on the bar when you're trying to bench press, right? And that could lead to injuries. And in such a way, the mystic needs to be conscious of how much stimulation is the mystic receiving, that it leads to growth and that it doesn't become an injury, for example, a new trauma. When you spiritually move from one environment into another, every time you adapt to a new environment, there is a degree of stress. There's a degree of stress because you need to be habituated with that sort of environment. Now, when a mystical teacher, when a white magician or a shaman, it doesn't matter what tradition, if someone is in that sense initiated by the light and seeks to expand human consciousness, for the benefit of all intelligences that are involved, such a being needs to be aware how much stimulation someone can take when they're trying to transfer knowledge and ability to them. Overstimulation is not wise, as I often have said. When we do certain spiritual exercises, too early psychosis or schizophrenia is a probability, because if you haven't cleared out your shadow, if you haven't taken care of slowly removing your ego structure, if you shift into an environment that you're not used to far too quickly, it leads to trauma. But we are in a time right now where the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. That's what we say in German. The cat is out of the bag, which means like now it's obvious what's in the bag. Now we see what's going on. And obviously we see an emphasis of control, an emphasis on keeping people in anxiety, keeping people in a low energy state. So since right now it is quite obvious even to the majority of society that something major is going on, I feel it is the time to speak in much more detail. What is the master plan here? Yes, there are forces of darkness, and yes, there are forces of light. Both have very different plans. I don't call the plan of light an agenda, because an agenda usually has a manipulative intent. The light plan does not have a manipulative intent, but the dark plan surely has. So we could call the dark master plan, if you will. We could call that an agenda. that would be more appropriate. So many of you have found beings that you have been inspired by, depending on what your interests are. Some of you are more into psychedelics, into shamanism, and you might have heard, for example, about Terence McKenna. Some of you are into Zen or Buddhism. You might have heard about Alan Watts or Shunryo Suzuki. Or some of you might have been inspired by spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle or Ram Dass. What I'm trying to say is there are many mystics who serve the light, but they deal with an aspect of the greater picture. A great teacher, for example, like Eckhart Tolle, only wants you to be initiated to get past the ego in the fastest and simplest and most efficient way possible with as least confusion. But after that, many initiations follow. But his teaching has been highly effective because it works for a vast amount of people. It reaches a vast amount of people. But at some point, when you go deeper, other initiations follow, other knowledge is required, where you develop a more profound understanding of mystical dimensions and mystical processes. And then you might be attracted to other teachers. Some of you, for example, have been interested in conspiracies. Some of you have been interested in ancient history. And all of these are puzzle pieces, but how do they actually fit together? How do they create this complete picture? Now, a mystic, when he gets born, has to make a choice. And the choice that the mystic has to make is, in order to be effective, he needs to focus his energy somewhere. Even though many mystics have had many different lifetimes in different cultures and different mystical traditions, there is something that they are particularly good at, particular experts in certain fields. Yeah, so in certain aspects of the puzzle. So what they will offer you are different answers. But before we come to the answers and to the aspects of the puzzle piece, let us point out what the agenda of, if you will, darkness is. Well, what is darkness? Darkness are those who benefit from keeping you in ignorance. The darkness, or the, if you will, the Luciferian consciousness, not the Christ consciousness, the Luciferian consciousness is the one that emphasizes the ego as an act of separation from cosmic consciousness, from the consciousness of unity, from the law of one, if you will. And this type of consciousness, and again, don't get lost in superstition, very important, don't buy into fear, none of that is helpful. See, this is why it's difficult for a mystic to speak about certain things. There is a reason why a spiritual teacher like Eckhart Tolle speaks about the pain body and does not speak about dark energy and demonic forces, because the majority of people, when they don't have psychic senses, they get more scared of their imagination than of the actual physical or metaphysical effect of interacting with such forces. So that is why, if I tell you certain things, I assume right now a certain spiritual maturity of non-reactivity, where you're able to not rile yourself up, but stay mindful and stay still. Stay still within your consciousness, right? If the stimulation right now creates a anxiety, then this information right now doesn't serve you yet. All right, that's a disclaimer. So what dark energy basically wants, or dark energy consciousness, it wants maximum separation from the source. It insists on being separate from God consciousness, but if it insists on being separate, what it needs to do, it needs to disconnect from its energy also. But since that is ultimately impossible, it needs to indirectly feed off source energy. So it needs a population of spirits who energize their desired construct and gives them life force. And many of you have watched the movie Matrix, and I loved how Dr. Bruce Lipton, this brilliant geneticist, said the Matrix is not a movie, it's a documentary. Well, here we go. So basically, all of you are creator beings. And depending on what information you are being fed, you recreate that information. So if you would have grown up in Nazi Germany and someone would have fed you racism, you would have created a racist world because you are a creator being. These might have not been your own thoughts. They might have been put into you, yeah, through the Hitler Jugend, like the Nazi Boy Scouts, or some sort of schools in the school system as a form of indoctrination. And as a child, you were unaware of what this indoctrination means. So you would basically use your psychic energy from the subconscious to stabilize a Nazi regime, to co-create a Nazi regime, unconsciously, because again, as a child, you would not have known that this programming was not benevolent. Because a programmer or an architect of a certain reality who has a manipulative intent will, of course, try to camouflage or cloak that manipulative intent in some sort of way behind, for example, caring about you, wanting you to be safe. Isn't that a language that we're all too familiar with recently? Stay safe. Stay safe, if I would translate it to you, it means stay a coward. That's what it means. Stay inauthentic. That's what it means. All right, so here we go. So we see the parallels. Now, the dark agenda needs energy because they don't receive source energy. They have cut the heart chakra off. And the heart chakra is where you receive energy from the oversoul, and the oversoul is energized by the highest point of existence, so to speak. When that energy channel is closed off, you literally become an energy vampire, because now you need the other beings who have source contact, who are tuned into source. You need to take their energy because you can't receive it directly. Well, how do you take it? Through terror and fear. Why? Because in order to energize your ego, you need to be in a low energy state. But now you need still energy to sustain yourself, so you need to lower other beings' frequencies so they share a reality with you. You want them trapped in your reality. You don't want them to ascend. You don't want them to leave your construct, because when they do, you lose influence. So you need to be very, very sure that they do not wake up and choose ascension. How do you do this? By constantly keep them in the survival fear, in the fear survival loop, because that is a lower energy existence in which psychic senses cannot develop. When you are in a fight or flight default mode of the nervous system, you do not notice subtle energy changes. Your intuition does not develop. Your psychic sense does not develop. So the whole system is designed to keep you in a constant state of fear. That's why news report about war, report about viruses, report about who you're supposed to be afraid of. See, this is what news basically does. News gives you the daily diet of what you are supposed to be afraid of, right? And then you wake up, you watch the news, you already start worrying, you're lowering your energy frequency, you're in the mind, you're not in the heart, you're not feeling your energy bonding. So you're disconnecting from spirit through worry. That's what you're basically doing. Okay. But when you then start waking up, yeah, let's say when you suddenly wake up to this weird matrix and say, this is very unloving here. This is very unloving here. Like something is off. For some reason, I seem not to be capable to get 2 feet on the ground in this world. Like something tries to keep me in a low energy state. Something is off here. And then you see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist might diagnose you with paranoid schizophrenia and says, well, you start having visions, you start sensing things, you start feeling things. Oh, I must re-socialize you. That means I program you back into the ego. Please take those antipsychotics so you don't threaten my psychiatrist ego that has invested into a materialistic ideology where I draw my sense of self from, right? I draw my sense of self from putting you people back into the matrix. I wouldn't call it that. I call it healing and therapy, because otherwise, you see, I wouldn't like myself when I look into the mirror. So the psychiatrist then gives you substances So your intuitive sensor starts developing and tells you something is off in this society. Yeah. So that can basically be turned off through the medication. Why do we take antidepressants? So we don't have to feel our misery. But if we feel our misery, we are awakening. We are beginning to self-reflect. We are beginning to question the very reality that we are experiencing. But if we, in that sense, put everybody into like a soft cushion of medication, this is exactly what Aldous Huxley described in Brave New World, where the majority of society would take soma, basically a drug that makes you a happy slave. So in order to still keep stealing your energy in the system, what needs to happen is that basically your psychic senses are being dulled. They're being dumped down. And every time those psychic senses arise, you're being gaslit. You were gaslit as a child when you told your parents there's a monster under the bed. You're being gaslit as a teenager when you say, well, when I'm going through high school, they try to program me into something that I'm not. I find that unloving. I don't want it. I want to rebel. I want to resist somehow. Then you're being gaslit. Then you go to universities, like everything here is so mental. Everything here is so detached from reality. Everything here is so unempathic, is so far away from what people are actually experiencing, and then you're being gaslit again. So basically you have these instances of programming where you are through society pressure, through emotional blackmail, you're being made to doubt your own senses. And whatever is madness is being offered to you as so-called rationality. But it's nothing but practicality out of fear. Yeah? This is what Jim Carrey once said, it's practicality out of fear. Like, I submit because it's practical, but it's based on fear, but I don't want to know it, so I call it reason. So then, but in order for you to stay in the matrix, I need to keep your scope limited. When you are an ant that walks over the flat ground, your horizon is limited, your bubble is limited, what you perceive is limited. Now, if I want to sustain that, I need to make sure that certain senses in you never develop, and I also need to give you a limited history. So, of course, there have been mystics who tried to point out that there were ancient cultures, like Atlantis, like in South America, for example, or the pyramid cultures, who were highly spiritually developed, who had, for example, also extraterrestrial contact. All of this has been deleted from history. Why? Because you would find out there are cycles of evolution, that such a thing as a soul harvest exists, that ascension windows exist in which you can increase your energy to go into a higher state of existence. And it also ensures that the spiritual knowledge that is associated with those lifetimes is not restored. So basically, you need to tell the human being is only a certain 1,000 years old. Yeah. I don't know the exact number right now, what mainstream history says when the Homo sapiens came into being. I think 140,000 years ago. I can look that up later. But the point is that the time spans in which intelligent consciousness has been on planet Earth has been much vaster, but the records of it have been deleted. But where do the records still exist? In you. When you start practicing mystically and you start having past life vision, suddenly you might see things from Egypt or Atlantis or Tibet or in the South American jungles. You might have moments where you see flashbacks of spaceships. You might have moments where you had flashbacks of spiritual contact or direct physical contact with alien beings. See, to the mystic, it's really not a rare occurrence. For many mystics, when they develop psychic sense, at some point they experience alien contact, telepathically. I had experience where I had alien contact, and those beings would show me their planet, they would show me their culture, they would explain how their culture works, what they emphasize in their society, what their intentions are, and if, for example, one of us was originally also incarnating there, they will let us know. And they will share spiritual knowledge, they will share knowledge about ascension. Yeah, they will share ways out of the matrix. And then people ask, oh, why don't they show up and free us of the deep state, free us of the dark ones? Because this is a free will game. If you will, Earth has been under a sort of quarantine for a while because the ascension game is not to be meddled with from the outside, because our free will is respected. Nobody comes and removes our government, because we are the ones who are supposed to choose our reality. But they're making us offerings. They offer us in meditations through psychic experiences to enhance our consciousness, to upgrade our physical system, to bring us into higher places. But of course, please always use your discernment. If you're having such experience, you need to be very, very aware that you're not manipulated by false light entities who might want to prey on your energy and who might want to mislead you. This is a game of discernment, and your ability to discern, of course, must grow if you want to ascend. You will be misled on occasion, as it happens even for very experienced beings, as I've recently seen mystics of a very, very high level getting misled by certain forces. This can happen. But it's important to not create shame or guilt, because this lowers your energy frequency. It is important to insist on tuning in into the higher frequencies and to expand, and not to respond with fear and guilt to, for example, being misled. Yeah, because this is exactly what, for example, perpetrator energy wants. Perpetrator energy wants you to feel guilty, so you stay in its frequency band, and it can interact with you telepathically, psychically, energetically. So we see that the general agenda of the dark is obviously to keep you in the dark. And I've written down some points that I've already addressed a little bit here. Yeah, what the agenda here is, and I'm going to read some to you, and how it is with any disease. First you do the diagnosis, and then you look, what is the therapy? So we're going to speak about what the therapy will be. And I want to tell you, please don't focus so much on the dark. Just know what the diagnosis is, and then focus on the light and take care of your own therapy. All right? Because if you focus on the dark, you obsess with the dark, you go down a rabbit hole, and you're focusing on what you don't want. Focus on what you want. Focus on what your soul wants. Right? Because this is where you tell your energy to this is where you tell your energy where to go. Where your intention goes, intention is attention, and attention is directing of energy. Be aware of that. So then, what is the dark agenda? Well, keeping humans in a constant fear survival loop so their psychic senses cannot develop. This is what I've already addressed. The next point would be teaching materialism to make consciousness identify with the body, which results in the fear of death and solidifies the ego illusion. Well, because if you have the fear of death, your attention is continuously on the meta plane. It's not in an esoteric plane, it's not in a more expanded plane. Your attention is on the plane of matter, and this is where you draw identity from. And then when your energy is low, it's easy to manipulate your consciousness, because your guidance system is not tuned into something higher from which you could get authentic information. So the next point would be using poisoning pharmaceuticals and low frequency technology to keep your attention on a low frequency band. Well, this is basically what the media does. Everybody has a smartphone right now. Most of the attention of people is within the technology or on the technology. So therefore, from the technology, you get a low frequency radiation, which information is mostly based on fear and mind stuff. So you stay in the intellect, so you're not in the heart. So you're not developing your intuition. You're not developing your receptivity or the feminine side of spirituality, where you're able to receive from a higher plane. You're constantly noisy, you're in the fear, and you think you need to do stuff, so you don't come into a state of being where you could download higher information. This is the whole point of this type of agenda. So the poisoning pharmaceuticals, as I've addressed also before, when people are waking up psychically, often in the West, it leads to a form of spiritual crisis, because there are no institutions to help those people through their Kundalini awakening, for example. And they end up hospitalized with a psychosis or schizophrenia diagnosis. And the doctors, out of helplessness or because maybe their own shadows that are existing in their subconscious psyche, they become, if you will, Agent Smith of the Matrix, and prescribe the medication that block those senses out. But they don't really lead to healing. They just lead to a postponing of awakening, or freezing someone's consciousness in time, if that makes sense. The next point would be traumatizing the youth early through a dysfunctional education system so they are susceptible to matrix programming. This is what we see everywhere. When I work with young people, they experience often bullying in school. They're being put under tremendous pressure by the teacher if they don't get good grades. Well, what do you need to do to get good grades? You need to obey and agree with what is being taught. So you're being bullied into submission. Yeah. And teachers are often part of the bullying. It's not only the kids who are exercising the bullying, it's often the teachers themselves. So in that sense, if you traumatize children early and you in that sense irritate their intuitive knowing, and you tell them that they can only survive and receive attention or energy or food or whatever if they obey to such a dysfunctional reality, then they will form out an ego. And that ego is basically what they believe gives them access to survival. So then you can put any program in there, and because they are creator beings, they will subconsciously use their energy to re-energize this type of architecture without even knowing it. And wonderful, they experience themselves as a victim to their experience. Wonderful, of course, I mean it in a very ironic way. So they energize their own prison, they energize their own matrix in which they are trapped without even knowing it. So the way out, of course, is sovereignty. The way out is knowing yourself. The way out is to remove this programming. Yeah, this is basically what, for example, Buddhism is. Buddhism is a deprogramming, saying removing of the ego program, and then downloading through mystical practice a divine program. How that's gonna go, well, we can speak about this in more detail later. So using medical technology to sabotage the ascension process through, right now, pretty obviously, a massive bullying of people who don't want to take the V. I've spoken about what I see, what I've seen, what the V does, how it is designed to block the ascension process, and I'm going to repeat it again. It is designed to attack the heart vortex. It disconnects you from your oversoul. It attacks your psychic senses. It attacks your energy vortex to keep you in a low energy state. I have seen this several times when scanning the energy of people in meditation, or when I did energy healing with people, energy surgery. This is what I've seen repeatedly. I wish I would be incorrect. If I'm incorrect, wonderful, but something is telling me that I'm not incorrect about this. Use your own discernment. Feel into yourself what feels right for you, what resonates with you, but I'm giving you that information. What you do with it is, of course, your own responsibility. So, using movies, mainstream music, and TV shows to promote addictions as coping mechanisms for the pains of living in the matrix, instead of exploring those feelings and offering solutions. So what do you see often in TV shows? There is a character who has an emotional problem, and the first thing he pours himself a whiskey, or he grabs a smoke. And you see this all the time. And this conditions your brain to emulate that behavior. So when you suddenly feel distressed, well, you grab a beer, you get a smoke, you see? So basically coping mechanisms are being offered. And coping mechanism is a nonsense term in psychotherapy, and I will say that very clearly, because coping mechanisms are mechanisms that are being basically installed so you can stay in a dysfunctional environment. No, change your environment. Change it with your consciousness, or move away if you can, move into a different environment. But a coping mechanism suggests that you are in a dysfunctional environment. Why develop a coping mechanism? Why not change your environment? I find this a very important question. Right? But this is not what is being suggested to you. Suggested to you is that you develop coping mechanisms so you stay addicted, so you stay in a low frequency state, so you can take further abuse. That's basically what it is about. And also what is usually not shown in mainstream media is spiritual practices. Sometimes you see this in documentaries, but these are mostly, of course, independent documentaries. And because a solution is not being proposed. There is a fatalism that is being proposed to you, and this fatalism says, well, life is pointless, there's a nihilism, but you gotta survive, and now you cope. And you gotta cope until you die. This is basically what is being suggested to you. That you could be a conscious, sovereign creator of your own reality, that is very rarely suggested. And of course, those who are famous, who are in mainstream pop music, those who are being pushed, they all create content that makes you focus on the lower energy centers. They either pose sexual content or materialistic content or competitive content where like they compete with someone, they dominate someone, and they are superior. These are all things that reinforce the ego state. Yeah. So while there's nothing wrong with having, for example, a nice house to live in or having beautiful sex with your loved one, if you're being bombarded constantly with, for example, sexual content or content about materialism or about being competitive, it is there to design a mindset that makes you fearful of other human beings and makes you compete with other human beings, so separates you from other human beings. So you're in a state of fear, not in a state of love. So now let's speak about what is much more important. Let's speak about the therapy here. What is the, if you will, the master plan of the light? Well, first of all, the idea that forces of light in higher dimensions, that they're all working together, that's not so very correct, because of course there are different groups, and these different groups have different abilities and different knowledge. So basically what will happen to a mystic when a mystic sits in meditation, whoever has the knowledge in that moment might contact you. So you might get contact with an ascended master. You might get contact with an alien collective. You might get contact with an angelic being. Yeah, there might be various beings of the Holy Spirit, so benevolent beings of the light, who will offer you knowledge and ability and teach you and help you to deprogram yourself and help you to open up the energy vortexes and grow in energy. But they all, of course, because they're sovereign beings, they have certain specialities, they have abilities in a certain area. So they don't necessarily all work as a coherent force, but they'll be aware of you when you enter higher energy planes. The same way you become aware of them, they then are very aware of you, and then they start communicating with you because they want to assist you to transcend the matrix and then basically become a wave breaker. Because if you become a conscious creator, you create your own reality and you practice white magic, you become an inspiring force in the world. And this is why the light does not have an agenda, because the light doesn't tell you what to do. The darkness will always tell you what to do. The light doesn't do that. The light just wants to inspire you so you become your authentic sovereign self. And that is already the plan. Because if you are your authentic sovereign self, you are basically a wave breaker in the matrix. Or imagine if there is a pond of water, and that is the collective consciousness. If a rock falls from the sky and it falls into and it hits the surface of the water, it creates waves, and those waves go through the whole consciousness. And this is basically what they know, what the antidote is. Awaken as many of us, helping us to develop our creator abilities, and then the energy shifts on the planet. And this is what's happening right now. This is actually the wonderful news. The energy is already shifting. So in that sense, it's important to focus on that. Don't focus on what doesn't work. Focus on turning inward. Don't focus on the external that suggests you that you need to be afraid and panicking and gain control of your environment. Focus on the internal and get your energetic downloads and upgrades from those higher places. And allow the higher beings to teach you in such a way that you become your own sovereign being that is, very important, non-violent and not dominating others, but your own creation will be radiant. You will be a lighthouse in the darkness, and therefore be a symbol of liberation. And the more symbols of liberation exist, the more people wake up. We have had this over many decades and centuries, that saints and ascended masters have returned. That's the bodhisattva image in Buddhism, where enlightened beings return to a body to, again, be this wave breaker, yeah, that breaks the mainstream energy, or just let's say is a block in the mainstream energy, and to give us an alternative program initially until we come into our own, until our own psychic senses develop, we can download advanced knowledge from a higher place. So in that sense, you had your Martin Luther Kings, you had your Gandhis, you had your Bob Marleys, yeah, you had various high-level enlightened masters who came back and told you how to get in contact with the source. But all of this was to restore your sovereignty, not to make you a follower of anything. So if people follow masters, well, they're still in the ego, yeah? But sometimes they need this before they can transcend the ego, and yet don't follow anybody, but please be inspired. So, what is the light's plan then? Not agenda, but plan. Well, restoring the memory of ancient civilizations, evolution cycles, remembering ancient spiritual practices, restoring your past life memory. Many of us have been practicing in Atlantis, in Egypt, in Lemuria, in the pre-Mayan culture that actually built the pyramids, and not the Mayas themselves who later moved in, so to speak, who were beings who had a high level of spiritual evolution, who could access higher dimensions. Many of you have those memories, but in order to restore those memories, we need to get you out of low energy environment, get you into nature, get you into meditation, open up your energy vortexes so you can begin downloading those past life memories. That needs to happen at a certain pace so it's not traumatic, because of course a lot of traumatic memory will also return to you, which requires a lot of shadow work and integration work. This can be straining. So it needs to happen at a reasonable pace. And it's not because you're being belittled by Spirit and Spirit says you can't handle it. No, Spirit knows in its full wisdom that there needs to be stimulation, regeneration, stimulation, regeneration. Your full knowledge can be restored, but it needs to be done piece by piece by piece. Otherwise, you're overwhelmed, bit by bit. No? So there are certain mystics, for example, on planet Earth, like the wonderful Graham Hancock, who focuses on restoring our memory of ancient civilizations, because the mainstream narrative that they have not been advanced civilizations before a certain since a certain date in human history, yeah, a few thousand years before Christ, that there have been no high-tech and high spiritually evolved civilization on planet Earth. This is simply a false narrative, but this false narrative is being kept so you don't wake up to the idea of cyclical evolution, I mean spiritual evolution, and that you don't remember those mystical practices. When you, for example, get into Egyptology and you see the profound, deep spiritual wisdom that even the Egyptians later didn't understood anymore, because it was distorted, of course, through power struggle between priests and pharaohs, and a lot of darkness came in. But originally, these were profound mystical teachings to get you into a higher place. Same way in Atlantis, but that information is, at least when it comes to the archaeology perspective, not as of yet available. But it is available in our subconscious as memory. And of course, when you start remembering that, you stop believing the mainstream narrative, and it's harder to keep you in the matrix, because now you become an archaeologist of your own consciousness, and you start digging deeper and deeper and deeper and find out, what do I remember? Where do I come from? Was I on other planets? Did I live in Atlantis? Did I live in Egypt? Did I had a life in Tibet, for example? These memories come back when it's time for you to remember, but you need to be a mystical practitioner first to free yourself from ego, otherwise you can't handle those informations. So, then you see, for example, I spoke in the beginning about puzzle pieces. This is the puzzle piece that Graham Hancock, for example, would focus on, because he's an expert in that. This is what he does very, very well. Then you have beings who are focusing on completely debunking the matrix in itself, like showing its abusive intelligence and how its propaganda works. There you have, for example, David Icke. So you have different mystics who focus on different aspects of the matrix, but every time you focus on an aspect of the matrix, you need to understand it's just a symbol for something that is hidden or blocked, that is not the matrix, but behind it is truth, that is veiled by the matrix. So any mystic will target, for example, a particular aspect of what has been veiled and remove the veil there. And this is why when you are on your mystical path, you jump from topic to topic to topic, because you're collecting puzzle pieces to create a map that is, if you will, an alternative matrix in your own consciousness of how you understand this particular reality, but it will be your own creation as a sovereign being, your own understanding, and not handed down or programmed by a matrix structure. So what then at some point will, of course, happen is that higher light beings will help you to undo the dysfunctional programming. Well, who is very good about that? Who's very good at that? Obviously, there's a name that is very known to many of you, and this is the wonderful Yeshua ben Yusuf, that is Jesus. So he focused very much on how to undo the fear programming and how to remind you of the law of God, which is a law of love. How to remind you of that, how to open your heart vortex to have that downloaded into you. And of course, he has been channeled many times, and very powerful books have been created though through these channelings. For example, A Course of Love or A Course in Miracles, who are dictated by him directly. And they are designed to break this dysfunctional ego program. And then you have, of course, wonderful mystics like Eckhart Tolle, who is breaking down this dysfunctional matrix program with his books without even mentioning it, because, well, he knows exactly what he's doing. He's acting from a deep level of wisdom. So he doesn't focus on the dark. He helps you to get past the ego as fast as possible. So to undo the dysfunctional programming is basically what every mystical system, if it is a white light system, if it is a white magic system, will do first. Because before you can know yourself, you need to remove what is not you. So the fear programming, the competitive programming, the prejudices, the judgments, they will be slowly, through spiritual practice, dissolved. And when they dissolve, stillness happens, no mind happens, samadhi happens, moksha happens, realization happens. And after this initial initiation, now you can download what is real, what is not based on illusion, what is based on cosmic fact. But first you got to remove the dysfunctional program, because it's going to mess with the alternative information. It's going to be a wrestling match, so to speak, between the ego and spirit that is trying to convey to you, if you will, the therapy. And then, of course, you're going to be educated how the dark tries to keep you in the dark by using, for example, malevolent technology. But this is something that is very difficult to speak about in the public, because those who are so deeply asleep, when you speak about anything like malevolent technology, well, they will, in a sense, that is so far away from what they can comprehend. Same way if we speak about telepathic alien contact, if we speak about magic, if we speak about the occult, if we speak about any of this is so far away from the mainstream consciousness that if you start speaking about this, it leads to an alienating experience for both sides. So often you will realize that the mystic doesn't speak about this because the majority isn't ready for it. They will speak about spiritual practice in more simple terms, in more direct terms, that lead to experience that enhances your consciousness, expands your consciousness, so to speak, but will not speak about the experiences itself, because if they would do, it will lead to an alienation. This is why someone, for example, like the wonderful Eckhart Tolle, has such a simplified teaching that gets straight to the point and gets you straight past the ego. Because if you would speak about what you experience when you get past the ego, many wouldn't practice. They would find it too alienating. Yes? So The next thing that the light forces will do, they will prepare you for extraterrestrial contact, because this is what's going to happen with human beings when they start awakening, because your family is much bigger than you thought. It's not only the human family, it's not your local family, it's a cosmic family. And many of you had contact with other beings, but you do not remember this. Your higher selves know, but you need to get in contact with your higher self first, and then you need to have a gradual exposure, because understand, when something is extraterrestrial, when something is alien, it is literally potentially an alienating experience. Even though my own experience with alien beings have been very gentle, very enjoyable, very sweet, to be honest. That the communication that I experienced with those beings were loving, compassionate. It was like meeting very educated ambassadors from wonderful places. And so therefore, for me, that's not distressing at all. But for some of you, maybe that might be distressing. So you need to be acclimated. You need to be slowly exposed so you don't have a fear response. And of course, they connect with us telepathically first, because before there's any real contact in terms of physical contact, where some beings of them are not physical, so they won't come into the physical, but some of them are. And if there would be physical contact, they need to make sure that this is not a tremendous shock for human society, and also they cannot ignore the free will. They are reading the collective consciousness, and they're waiting for humanity to make a conscious choice to have that contact, because they honor your free will. The dark entities do not honor your free will, but benevolent alien beings who have a high spiritual development, they honor your free will, and they will not go against your free will. If alien contact scares you, they will not contact you. That is important to understand. And therefore, understand that these are wisdom decisions. These are not decisions to belittle you. Yeah, they are aware that you can grow into a mature spiritual being that can handle these type of experiences. And if that is your intention, there will be possibilities potentially to get there. Yeah, you can invite that into your life. But then it might be initially be a very slow process to develop those type of abilities and senses, the telepathic ability, for example. So if you're too much in the ego, and if you're too eager, and if you're too tense and too anxious, you will slow yourself down. Yeah, you need to have a certain stamina. That's why meditation practice, daily meditation practice, gives you that ability to develop that patience. Yeah? Very important. So, many of those beings, they will assist you in penetrating the veil by upgrading your spiritual and psychic abilities. So this is what, for example, ascended masters do, angelic beings, but also alien beings of a high level of evolution, and deities that do exist. For example, the Hindu deity Kali was known in Egypt as Isis and in Greece as Athene. So basically, depending on the culture, a deity will use an interface, an appearance, so to speak, that doesn't irritate the psyche of that particular culture to get into communication, to transmit healing, or, for example, psychic knowledge of great importance. And in that sense, those beings are very, very real. The question is, are they a reality to you? Well, that depends if you can share an energetic reality with them. So when you do, all of these benevolent beings together, they form the Holy Spirit, yeah, in that sense, not necessarily as a coherent whole, but they are of that energy frequency. And what they do, they will help you upgrade your energy bodies. For example, some of you sit in meditation, you suddenly feel your heart chakra is charging up, or your third eye is charging up. But because you don't have psychic vision yet, you might not see that there's an ascended master in an energy body standing in front of you, yeah, putting your hand close, his hand close to your forehead, and is charging your forehead up with light. So you don't see that yet, but it's happening. And if you have such experience, please do not be afraid, right? Please do not get into a fight or flight response. If you get into a fight or flight response, you need to have a deeper meditation practice that you get the reactivity out of the nervous system. Yeah, so you stop twitching, you stop flinching, you stop hardening up, you keep your body relaxed, you keep the energy flowing, you keep your breath deep. Yeah? These are very important practices. The less fearful you are, the more psychic experience you can integrate. So, upgrading of psychic abilities through the Holy Spirit. And there, of course, there are certain instances of initiation. Yeah, for example, ego death, samadhi, activating of the third eye, kundalini activation, certain kundalini upgrades, building of the light body, and so on and so on. This is way too complex to break it down. Yeah, and it gets very mental if you start understanding it with the mind. Please do it step by step. Whatever you will need to know will be made available to you if you mature enough, and if the Holy Spirit sees that the knowledge that you use it in a loving and compassionate way. Then more and more information will be given to you, and the upgrades will come in exactly at the correct time. So please don't try to rush ahead. Don't try to shortcut it. Don't get into black magic. Don't get into occult. Don't get obsessed with these type of things. Let it happen intuitively, naturally. If you are in the mind, you actually slow yourself down. The more mental you get, the more you overthink, the more you worry, the more you slow yourself down. Please don't do this. Be in the heart. Meditate on the heart frequently. So, what happens then also, not only the charging up with energy, but those beings of the Holy Spirit, they help you to upgrade your nervous system, your energy bodies. They might perform energy surgeries on you, removing dark energy, therefore limiting access ports for dark entities, for demonic forces into your energy field and consciousness. But they can only do it, of course, if you do the shadow work. You need to remove the dysfunctional belief so the dark entities don't come in again. So first often is the removal of the dysfunctional belief, and then the energy surgery. So this part of your energy body is restored, so dark entities cannot attach any longer. DNA upgrades will happen that at some point lead to a complete remodification of the body, of the nervous system, and so on, which will lead to a recalibration of senses, will activate it, if you will, the higher senses. Of course, the opening of energy centers in the body and the transmuting or removing of dark energy. These are the two polarities that are present in your life. So, how aware you are of that presence? Well, again, things do happen if you are aware of them or not. You are being offered on a daily basis to polarize towards the light or polarize towards the dark in many ways. The dark will make your offerings and the light will make your offerings. And of course, the trick is to continuously make higher energy choices. So to focus on the light, to focus your attention on the ascended masters, to focus on your attention on deities and angels and benevolent beings who share a higher frequency space. Instead of buying into fear, instead of buying into anxiety, instead of buying into competition. But of course, this is a discernment process and something you will be misled, which is also not necessarily bad. If you're being misled, you're making experience. If you're being misled once, let's say if you touched fire once, it's highly likely you won't touch fire twice. So this is part of the spiritual maturing process. In that sense, be conscious of the fact that nothing that happens to you in life is an accident or random, that in fact any experience that you have within the present moment is a manifestation, a mirror to your own consciousness, and it's rather metaphorical than physical. So if you can look at your physical experience as if it is poetry or a painting of your own subconscious, a deeper understanding will come to you, and then you can continuously make the choices that lead you into a higher dimensional reality. And that means to make higher energy choices. That means to make choices from inspiration. That means to make choices from passion. That means to make choices from love. That means to make choices from authenticity. That means to make choices from, let's say, topics, themes, puzzle pieces in life that exhilarate you. But this is not a fear feeling. This is a sense of excitement where it's very easy to focus your energy to get into a flow state. These are the moments you need to energize with your attention. If you focus on money, survival, death, about death, let's say, of course, it is a spiritual practice to contemplate death, but it's only it's a practice to go beyond death, of course. If I contemplate death long enough, I go beyond the ego, if I do it fearlessly. But what I'm saying is, like, don't focus on the body. Don't focus on what happens to the body. Focus on what could you create? What inspires you? What brings you joy? What makes you feel more connected? Where do you stop thinking so much? When are you thinking less? Where are the gaps in thinking? Focus on those experiences. Focus on the teachers and deities and ascended masters and angels and whatever you have a connection with intuitively. All of you had past lives. You had spiritual connections with a variety of teachers. I have met people who don't know that, for example, in a past life, they were in India and were a student of an ascended master. They don't know. But of course, their higher self sometimes, if I have a counseling session with them, will tell me that because their higher self cannot break through their current ego. They will use me as a let's say remote, as an indirect way of speaking to them. So they're giving me the information, so I give them the information because they can't receive it psychically from their own higher self yet. So please do understand, these things are not circumstantial, these are not random. If you are focusing on a certain teacher on YouTube, and this can be a teacher who currently has not a body, that doesn't mean the teacher does not exist, and that the teacher is not real. You can set your intention on them. Understand that all those beings are highly telepathic. That means they hear your thoughts, they sense your feelings, they know you inside out. You might not perceive them yet, but if you set your intention on them, if you give them permission to assist you, to help you, to teach you, to inspire you, they will. Please trust that. Contemplate about that, my friends. Be well and have a wonderful day.